when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Hello, Christopher. Welcome. Welcome. So nice to have you join me for this very special episode. I'm really excited to have people share with your story, hear all about your particular change story that you've chosen. Before we get all into that, I would love for you to share a little bit about yourself for anyone who's listening or watching, who you are, where you're from, what you do.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for having me on, and it's an absolute pleasure. So, yes, as you know from the accent, and, and obviously we know each other, but people will be able to tell that from Durham originally, so from the north of England, and yeah, I mean the summary would be that in a 2 minute overview would be that I was a singer when I was in my 20s, came down with a really sort of life-threatening health condition at 27, would have been in the 27 club, as I think we'll get into today. And then from there became a vocal coach after that. And then another change in life now is, which I'd love to talk about. It's gone to more of a sort of life coach, as it were, in and around the change itself.
Mm.
So in and around the change itself is now what I'm actually coaching and helping people with the most, because as you would know, sometimes those change moments, which we'll get into, can be the most meaningful, transformative moments for yourself. And if you think, well, maybe that's the highest purpose I can be. So that's it in a nutshell. And the few big changes, obviously the big health one at 27, but even the recent one, I wouldn't mind slipping into if it was helpful, but from just the vocal coach who was fairly successful to this change now with more of a life coach helping people get through that sort of times of trauma and challenges.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I totally agree. It's what we've talked about before, isn't it? Where it's actually probably the biggest challenges we face are like our biggest teacher, right? So it makes total sense. So just before we actually get to hear about your, this change story that you've chosen, as you've mentioned, obviously you faced a few. This is probably one of the most pivotal for you. Why this one particular that you wanted to share today?
Yeah, with the health one, I mean, it was such a life-changing event. I really feel like, obviously, we know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And health basically is that bottom one. I think it's the most fundamental need as a human, because obviously we're built for survival. And if the health's in danger, everything's in danger. So I think there's a lot of changes, but if they're higher on the pyramid of needs, I don't think they're as fundamental. But when health goes, everything goes. So it was a change to my social status. It was a change to my relationships. It was a change to my finances. So I think that's the best change I can talk about, because it actually incorporates the most change I think can happen from a health crisis like that.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing. It's kind of almost that catalyst for lots of other things, like a domino effect. And to your
Yeah.
point, if you don't have health, you don't have a lot, right? It all is foundational.
Yeah, it's all foundational, and it's the most, yeah. I mean, literally everything goes, doesn't it? So, and then that bottom of the pyramid is the most fundamental, and that's what happened to me at 27, and fairly quickly, as we might get into. So it was pretty scary, and all the lessons and insights that hopefully will help people today.
Great. No, thank you. I think it is going to be just that. So let's get into it then. Where did this change, this health scare that you had, where did it start? And how did it kind of manifest?
Yeah, and it started literally on the later end of 26. I was a singer. I was a bit stressed looking back at it, but a lot of people are stressed. I was in a competitive industry of being a singer. I think there was this constant competition does grate on you a bit, constantly to be in an environment where you're in a room watching other people, who's going to get picked. I think looking back at it, people say what brought it on. And there's a number of factors, but maybe I was stressed in the career I was in a little bit. But anyway, it came on very suddenly. um, and if anyone's slightly squeamish here, I'll try and be as good as possible. But basically, I just saw blood when I went to the toilet, when I was on the toilet tissue. And at first you think maybe it's just nothing, and then one thing led to another, led to being diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, which is a form of inflammatory bowel disease. A lot of people haven't actually heard of ulcerative colitis as much as the other form. There's only two forms in the IBD, inflammatory bowel disease category, and the other one is Crohn's disease.
Mm.
That's the one people have heard of a bit more, I
Yes.
find, when I explain it.
Mm.
But anyway, didn't know anything about this. It's very scary because with me and my family going through it, the whole question is, well, what's ulcerative colitis? Like it's all like that. It's like, well, what does this mean? So you're finding out as I'm getting more and more ill, and basically over the course of, I can't remember exactly how long, but it was months,
Mm.
where it went from being diagnosed, definitely within the year,
Mm.
to it getting worse, and then trying steroids, and then it not working, and trying other things, and it getting worse to the point where it just completely was so bad that I was at the toilet 20 times a day, bleeding.
Wow.
My weight went from 11 stone to 8 stone. I remember them trying one drug. It's called infliximab. But obviously, when we're talking about medicines and drugs, it's always best to, seek proper. And I'm not a doctor or anything, but I'm sure it was called infliximab that they tried on me,
Mm.
and that was like a £3,000 last ditch go to
Right.
shut off
Right.
my immune system,
Oh
because
God.
it's a inflammatory bowel disease. Just quickly, it's an autoimmune disorder. So even though your colon in there, your large
Mm.
intestine, is
Mm.
good,
Mm.
the body for some reason thinks it's not good,
Mm. Tries to
and
attack
so
it.
it's attacking itself, and then you're
Mm.
seeing the after effects of that, which is just bleeding and just being so ill.
Yeah.
So anyway, it got to the point where literally, and this one still gets me because my mum said, I mean, I was so out of it on drugs and everything, that I was in my own world at this stage.
Mm.
I was so weak that you couldn't have a conversation with me.
Mm.
But my mum, said, they've said that there's nothing left to do but cut out your entire colon, 6 foot long, or else. And I was like, well, what, or what? And it's like, well, or else you'd be dead in like 2 days, and yeah, I still.
Mm.
It's the little things you remember in a moment like that. You remember like the smell of the room, or
Mm.
what song that you had on repeat that you were playing. But that is always a moment,
Mm.
because as human beings, we know we're not fully conscious, are we, all the time, of our death when we're watching a TV show, we're moaning about anything, but to hit it like that. And then, so that was it. And they said, you're going to wake up with an ileostomy bag. Again, most people have heard of a colostomy bag, very similar. Um, and this happened when I was 27 years old, and that saved my life. And then, I mean, I'll let you go back. But then it was a very long journey after that, over several years of getting my life back, getting my self-esteem back.
Mm.
I mean, I'll share some of these, but changing, friends coming and going.
Yeah.
What am I doing with my career? Feeling worthless.
Yeah.
And eventually, it took, actually, from that point in 2013,
Mm.
it took till 2009. It took 6 years later for me to do that video that you
Mm.
mentioned.
Mm. Mm.
6 years
Mm.
from
Mm.
that point is how long it
Mm.
actually took.
Mm.
So it was a massive journey from that moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for going kind of back there. I think for anyone listening that, either themselves or that someone they know, um, has gone through such a serious diagnosis, and
Mm.
that scary thing of, like, to your point, after diagnosis, them trying lots of different things, you
Mm.
educating yourself, you're learning. Can you look back, and obviously with your family, kind of, even how you processed that, even like before, obviously they got to the point where they just said, right, well, we're going to have to operate.
I wish I could give an amazing answer here, but the truth is, I was so pumped full of drugs that I can hardly remember anything. My mum was
Mm.
so worried about me, and she was in
Mm.
all the time,
Yeah.
because they were sometimes talking to me and telling what happened, and I was so weak
Mm.
that if you'd have asked me to sign, I think I just about signed the form for
Mm.
to do the op. So at the time, I was so out of it,
Mm.
honestly, on every drug that they tried, that my head was
Mm,
I probably was at the point where I could pretty much hardly talk. I remember I was at the point where I couldn't even walk to the toilet anymore, and
mm,
I was just completely bedbound. So at that time, I think it was at that very base survival level
mm,
with being drugged up as well, where
mm,
it was just survival, survival, survival. But obviously, in the midst of that, there were thoughts of like, maybe that was it,
of course. Well,
you
it's
know?
almost like that physical breakdown of just everything breaking down, that you just had to surrender to it all to then
It was
get to the point where, yeah.
It was more actually when I was right at the end there, I was so drugged that you could have said anything to me.
Mm,
But the scarier time was when I was more conscious, as it
of
were.
course.
So
Yes.
maybe 2 weeks before, 3 weeks before that, when it was starting to get worse and worse and worse, before I was
Mm,
so ill I could hardly
yeah.
mobilize,
Yeah.
that was very scary because I remember
Of course.
thinking, just what the
The
hell is
hell.
going on here?
Yeah.
And I remember just saying to my mum or something like, this is just like a
A
nightmare.
nightmare. Yeah.
Like what have I and all the questions come up, don't they? Like, what have I done to deserve this?
Mm,
Why me? Or like I had more life to live. I know I did, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Those things come up. So that's probably more the answer you're looking for. But no, right at the end, it was my mum and dad in with me, holding my hand, making decisions. I was so bad that I
Of
couldn't
course.
do anything.
Yeah. So you had the operation. You basically, they had that was last resort essentially
Yeah.
to do that. So what happened then post the operation? Like, in because obviously it took you a long time, obviously, to build yourself back up again, losing so much weight and all
Yeah.
of that. How was your recovery from the op?
Well, I mean, the real recovery, I mean, was years. But I mean, in the immediate, I think the first thing to get back in the recovery is just your physical is the first thing, and which is why I'm now more of an advocate with the life coaching in terms of trying to help people through the area after that of because that was a hard process, as in the mental,
Mm,
emotional side. Because the surgeons tend to zip you up, stitch you up, and you're out.
mm,
And there was some aftercare help, don't get me wrong, but the emotional
mm,
aftercare was the hard journey.
mm,
Just quickly, when I was in my drugged haze from all the medications, they would have said to me, "You're going to wake up with an ileostomy bag, and you're going to have what's called a stoma." And you just sort of think, yeah. But I remember when I did wake up, the first time I saw that on my body, I just broke down and that was one of the lowest points actually. Even though I
mm,
was alive,
mm, mm.
um, it was hard. It's hard to see on yourself
Of course.
what that looks like. I mean, people may even not know, but so you could look it up. But it's not a pretty picture on your own body with
No.
what they have to do and how you're left and
Mm,
um but what was the recovery? Honestly, it was over months and years. First, it was getting the body healthy enough to just walk again and stuff
yeah.
like that.
Hmm.
Um, and then again, one of the reasons why I'm so passionate now about sort of, coaching, helping other people was the thing that really saved me was then personal development.
Mm, right.
Because, friends can, friends are great, but friends tend to, not unless you've got an amazing social circle group, tends to just wish you all the best. But it's not like having a life coach around or someone who has really got the tools to really help you
Yeah.
through a time. So I turned to a lot of personal development videos,
Yeah.
books, courses, did a life purpose course.
Yeah.
And those like very experienced mentors really helped me
Mm,
get my mind back on track, I think.
mm, mm. No, I think it's an important um, thing to talk about a little bit, because I think for most friends, as you say, they don't have the tools because most people are just scared. They don't know what to say,
They
do
don't know
they?
what to say. They might love you, but they don't know what to say. And obviously, they're not personal development gurus. Not that everyone needs to be, but they might love you and say, "Well, just think positive" or something like that. But what you actually
Mm,
need is to maybe like the process I went through in this one life purpose course I did was, reassess my values,
mm,
reassess meaning, journaling
mm,
exercises,
mm,
but
mm.
very deep work
Yeah.
that really that was a massive help for me. And again, why I feel now that that's
Mm.
who I want to become a little bit more
Yeah.
with my
Well, when
coach.
you've lived it, it makes total sense.
Well, I know that it, without, it's funny because the people who I've spent the most time with, apart from obviously my immediate family, and the people who've influenced me the most and made the most meaning to my life are people I've never met in person.
Mm. 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 Mm.
And, and it's from this beautiful time where you can,
Mm. Mm.
seek courses on whatever you want or read books
Oh
on
yeah, it's
whatever you
amazing.
want.
Yeah.
Um, and if I'd have not had that access and my immediate friendship group were cared, don't get me wrong, the
Yeah.
ones who stayed, by the way, some of them
Yeah.
didn't, which we could talk about if you want,
Mm.
but still couldn't really give me the resources to really help me,
Of
even though they
course.
cared.
Yeah. No, I think let's talk about that because, you hear of many people, and I know in my life, I've had experience whereby even, when you go through very challenging times, people feel so uncomfortable that they don't even want to talk to you. So they'll actually cross the street kind of thing to kind of go, oh, I mean, I know what came up for me when you were describing that different situation. But when I lost my mum to cancer, I
Mm.
think when I went back to work, people just didn't know what to say. So instead, they chose to ignore me, which actually was more painful. So I want to talk about that because I think for a lot of people, they don't maybe have those tools, like you say, that they're fully equipped to deal. In that moment, if you could go back and advise your friends, like some of them that maybe were in that fearful place, maybe didn't know what to say, what would you kind of advise them now? What did you need most back then, do you think?
Well, I'm going to give you an answer that you might not like, but the truth is, I don't think they could have. I think that now these days, someone was asking me on because I post things on YouTube. They're worried about friends leaving them and stuff like that, and I answered something like, "People can only help you to the skills of which they could help themselves," sort of thing.
Yeah.
I I just think maybe I was a bit unlucky, but I think some of the people around me just didn't have the skills to be able to like the deep communication skills, say.
Yeah.
A lot of people around me, I mean, I'm not going to generalize too much, but I was in showbiz, obviously.
Yes.
It was all great when it's going great and who knows
Mm,
who, it's all a bit,
yeah.
fancy and stuff like that sometimes. And a lot of the friendships that I had looking back at it, everything, they were great to go out drinking with and have fun and
Mm,
party with and go to
mm,
like celeb nights out.
yeah.
But I don't think they had the skills within them to cultivate some of the deep sort of conversations that I needed at the time. But if they did and they just were afraid to reach out, then I guess the best thing they could have done was just say, something along the lines of, obviously I'll never understand quite what you're going through. I know I don't understand,
Mm,
but in whatever way possible, I will try to be there. So if you need to talk
yeah.
day and night, I'll listen. Now,
Yeah.
that might not have been great, but as we know, talking to a tree is better than talking
To no one.
to no one when you're so bad. They might not have had the skills to be able to,
Yeah.
like some of the conversations we have together where
Yeah.
you dig deep and you really help me, but that's what a great coach is for. But even if they just said that and
Yeah.
they didn't have the skills to really help me, but they were just a listener, I think maybe at that point could have been.
Yeah. Yeah. But I,
And
I
some
think,
people were, don't get me wrong. It's not like
yeah.
everyone abandoned me,
Oh, no.
but as we know, some people love it when you're doing well in life. And some people, aren't around when you're not.
Yeah.
But honestly, just for fun, vice versa also.
Oh,
I
yeah.
had one friend who I feel like now looking back at it, he was very good with me when I was down.
Mm,
But then when I started becoming successful again, he didn't like it
mm,
because he wanted to play that role of like, I'm such a good friend for this guy because he's in need and I'm really there for him. And he was, don't get me wrong.
yeah.
But then when I started getting out and
Yeah.
being a successful good vocal coach, he wasn't really that. He didn't like it. So
Mm,
that was funny as well. I think that when you're in the extremes of either doing very well in life or completely down and out, that extreme will filter out a lot of people around you.
yeah. Yeah. No, and I think it's a great segue to kind of go into, and I'm glad we've covered it, because what I'm really hearing is don't take it personally, because often the way that people behave, it's actually not often about you. It's about how they feel about themselves or about the situation, and how
Yeah.
much capacity they have to deal with what's going on, right?
Have they got the capacity? Yeah, exactly. And as we know from being Northerners, there's some people who might care, but they're very shut off.
Mm.
And with all the will in the world, they might care, but they'll never say it,
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
they'll
They don't
never
know how to
reach out.
express it. Mm.
Yeah. I just think that you have to have enough of a great understanding and a depth and a skill set within yourself to be able to try and help someone through a time that if it happened to them, they wouldn't be able to cope with at all.
Yeah, of course, of course. I think the other thing that comes up for me, and I think for those people who maybe don't really know, or something's happened to somebody and they just think, what do I say? I'm almost in freeze because I don't know what to say to this person. I think maybe at the absolute foundation, you mentioned it, is just to be there, to just say, look, I don't know what to say, but I'm here. Like even just that, and not saying
Yeah,
anything, but just being there is
yeah.
so much more powerful than, because I think where we fall over ourselves in a sense, and I think we're conditioned, is to try and fix people. And I think if people can't fix, they don't know what to do, so they flee.
Mm.
So I think that's what
Yeah,
happens.
and so, but you're right. They might love you and they might care, and some of them will be great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, my mom in particular,
Mm,
was just astounding through it, and I couldn't have got through it. So, and you don't need many
mm,
if as a gesture of hope to people. Even if you have two people
mm,
by your side,
mm,
that's better than 20 people who are
mm,
who aren't great with you, say.
mm, mm,
You only need really just even one or two people. And if you can't get that in your personal life, because it's a time of a great need,
mm,
you would have to reach out to some sort of health
mm,
professional.
mm, mm, mm.
Um, ideally in your personal life, but probably ideally both,
Yeah.
because it's going to be a different feel with someone who's a trained professional
Mm,
with and someone in your personal
mm,
life.
mm, mm.
But you don't need many. Maybe even if you just had one of each.
Yeah, it's a depth, isn't it? It's people
It's
who
a
can
depth thing,
really
not a yeah,
be there. Yeah,
not a
it's a
quant,
quality, not a quantity.
not a yeah. That's right. Yeah, 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 for sure.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, because we're going to get to some of the pillar questions really that kind of navigates us through this change story. What were some of the fundamental things that this journey has taught you about yourself and about life? I mean, it's a pretty huge question, but I know you've had lots of reflections on this, so
I've pondered on this.
just a bit.
The fundamental things that it taught me about life. God. Well, just before I'll probably segue into this anyway, I just want to mention maybe a few of the key little insights that helped me through.
Yes, please.
One of them, which I always like sharing, which people are fascinated by, is when I was a singer, I was Chris Mitchell.
Mm,
And when I was in the midst of all these personal development books and going through that massive change, I changed my name to Christopher David Mitchell.
mm,
Now, it was still my name, but it was
mm,
just a
mm.
more longer formal, included my middle name
Yeah,
that was always my middle name.
yeah.
And I look back at that and I think that it did actually really help. So I think one of the best ways that you can go forward in life is sometimes a necessarily shift in identity.
Mm,
So what was going to keep me suffering is if I tried to go back to the old Chris,
mm,
the guy who was singing on stage or performing 8 shows a week. I was ill and had an ileostomy bag. That life
mm,
was not going to happen again,
mm,
and I was going to be miserable if I tried to
mm,
still
mm,
have a life that just wasn't suited for me anymore.
mm, mm,
So that identity shift to Christopher David Mitchell was one that there's a lesson there of like sometimes you need to make a sort of story shift break of identity like that. Now, obviously, as we know, you don't want to get too attached to too many layers of identity, because that can actually, um, hit you back in the face on that one, as it were, because you want to be able to be flexible, to not be like, this is who I am the entrepreneur, or I am the coach, or whatever. But
Mm,
I think at a time of crisis,
mm,
when you're desperately trying to move to the next chapter of your life, some switch
mm,
in change can help. And it's sort of like what they did in the, I don't know, the old sort of tribal days, where, the sort of boy to become a man change, and then they
mm.
do some marking of that
Some
change. And
ritual.
so, yeah, and some, and that was almost my version of that,
Yeah.
which actually really helped. Um,
No, I love that. I just jump in at that point because
yeah,
I think we are here to evolve, not revolve, right? And I think
yeah,
often when there's been a pivotal change like this one, to your point, then if we go back, then there's always that danger that you'll compare, or it'll never be the same.
yeah,
So much so at the moment, on a wider scale, everyone's been talking in the last year or so of like, oh, I want to get back to a new normal. Whereas actually it's about, and it's what you said at the very beginning, it's about moving forward. It's like, look
yeah.
through the windscreen, not the rear view mirror, because you're not going that way, you're heading forward. And I think it's an important point you raised, that even if it's just like a little shift there of like using your fuller name, then it marks to your whole self at a deep level, this is a new chapter for me.
Yeah, yeah, and that was a big shift,
Yeah,
for me. And however you do it, yeah,
yeah,
a little change ritual to
yeah.
give the markings of the, yeah, because when I was witnessing other people who, when I was still in that hospital, who had the ileostomy bag, a lot of them, when I witnessed how they were suffering still and miserable, it's because they were still trying to do all the old stuff they used to do.
Mm, yeah.
That was the thing. Whereas if they just embrace the shift and the change in who they are and who they're, and where their life might go. But if you cling on to, well, I think I could go back and be in a, and then you could get trapped in that story for decades.
Mm,
And as we know, a lot of people, do.
do. Yeah,
Yeah, when you see people having, crises when they're older. So I think that was a massive, to be able to shift identities.
yeah,
Um, Another big insight for me was, I mean, I love Wayne Dyer.
yeah.
And my favorite book of all time, just to share for people out there if they're struggling, is The Obstacle Is the Way by Ryan
Mm,
Holiday. My
yes.
favorite quote of all time was, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change,
Yeah.
by Wayne Dyer. And I tell this story to people because when I was in the hospital, and I was noticing, we're all on the same ward. We all had ileostomy bags or colitis.
Mm,
And there's someone that I'm looking at is like, oh God, I hate it. It's horrible. It's ugly. And then there's someone else saying, oh God, it's great. I'm not on any meds anymore. I'm not on any
mm.
pain. Like, oh God, it's fine. And you get really used to it. And it's just a blessing that I'm not in any pain anymore, this, that, and the other. And that's the moment when, and I'm reading these personal development books, I'm like, that's what he bloody means. He
Yeah.
means that the bag is the same here,
Yeah.
but if your opinion and mindset towards the bag
Mm,
directly affects how the bag is in real life to you.
yes.
And so that was another huge moment for me when I started shifting around, saying,
Yeah.
yeah, and then you start going off on stories of how can you, use this for the greater good, and then came the health video sort of thing of how can I turn my greatest weakness into my greatest strength,
Mm,
and stuff like that. So that was another big insight for me, and I take that with me everywhere I go now, that developed through the journey of healing, as it were.
yeah. No, I love that so much, because, and I'm really, again, glad that you've brought that up, because I think for a lot of people, when you read self-development books, you take it in intellectually and you kind of go, oh, right, yeah, that makes sense. But I think what's so powerful in with the story you share, what made it even more powerful was that you had a real life challenge and you had the application of that wisdom
Yeah,
like in real time. There's
yeah,
something as well that was like really emotionally happening to you.
yeah. No, it's true. And then you get a light bulb moment and you think, oh, it wasn't all woo-woo nonsense. Um,
Yeah, there's some truth in that. Yeah.
but looking back as a whole, I would say that, when you're in difficult times, I mean, let's face it, it feels crap
Mm,
sometimes. It just does. And that's fine.
yeah.
And to not resist that, and to allow that, and
Mm,
to be truthful about how you feel. But I think that, when you do get out the other side, and, as you definitely probably will, you do realize the skills that you've cultivated. And the best way I explain this just really quickly is like a video game.
mm,
Is that if everyone's playing the video game on easy mode, well, you're a crap player
mm,
because you don't have to be good.
mm,
And you think that you want to play the game on easy mode, but you get these avid video gamers, they don't want to play it on very easy where they're just walking along because
mm,
there's no fun in that and
mm,
reward with the game.
mm,
But when you're going through a time of deep change, adversity, or something like that, and
mm.
challenging times, basically it's out of your control. Someone shifted the video game to very hard mode.
Yeah.
Now you got a choice because when you're in very hard mode, if you want to survive, you've got to be a better player.
Mm,
You've got to have better skills. You've got to have better mindsets. You've got to do all these things to survive. So
mm,
I look back, and I think, well, but I wouldn't have read all those personal development
mm,
books, or I have to be cultivating more resilience, or I have to be cultivating creativity, or I have to be finding inner happiness when the external world is quote unquote crap.
mm,
And all these skills would never have happened if life stayed on easy mode. And then when the game goes back to a normal mode and you
mm.
get out of adversity, you've still got the skills. And that's when you, a bit like me, see the opportunity and everything and then go crazy because that was an insight, but it is hard to see that in the moment.
No, it's a
Um,
great analogy. It's a
but
really great
I love that
analogy.
analogy, and it's
Mm,
just so true. I mean, life
mm,
is like a video game character. When people say the best investment you can make is in yourself. Well, when you're going along as a video game character, it's the reason I've played the odd video game, is
mm,
that you get some money in the video game, and what's the best thing you can do with it?
mm,
It's not to buy more ammo. Sorry,
mm.
and then I'll stop the
We're
analogy.
continuing it.
But
Yeah.
you always have the choice of upping your character's skill set or their speed or their
Nice.
strength. And
Yes.
that is what you're doing in the moments when life is very hard, even if you don't realize it.
Yeah. No, it's a powerful analogy because I think for people like listening who are gamers or even those of us who aren't, right, it's still life is that, and it's going to throw you obstacles. The obstacle is the way. It's like the stoicism kind of philosophies that actually it's about life making you stronger and challenges making you stronger. So I can
Yeah.
imagine your resilience levels are high from this experience that you've gone through.
Yeah. And as we know from me coming to you for help, sometimes they're too high. So I'm not nowhere, not by no means perfect because the only danger, just to say, and this is just me being really, hopefully honest here, is that you got to be careful though, because like I say, sometimes you will create stories in very traumatic situations that will serve you for a bit, but not long term.
Mm, mm,
So the example I think I've shared with you before personally is that I feel like it's like a pendulum for those who are watching this on video, is that it's swung one way with you're out of action and you've got no health and you've got no relationships and you've got no money and you've got no social status. When you do get better, guys out there listening, just be careful because you're probably going to swing completely the opposite direction. You're going to go out and I'm going to conquer the world and be an opportunist because you've been held back on the sidelines of life for maybe months or years.
mm.
So there might be a time where you go the other way before you find your ultimate balanced way through life.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's an important thing to say because I think when you've been repressed, right, you do totally swing the other way. And, we were talking before we came on and recorded this, that I identify with that too, because in
Yeah.
my, relationship and my life, I felt repressed. So what did I do? Well, I hit the fuck it button and traveled for you. So that was my pendulum swing moment,
Yeah.
that took me. And then to bring back down to finding your sweet spot. Can
Yeah.
you talk to people about kind of you realizing that you had maybe swung out?
Well, that's the thing, is that when you read The Obstacle is the Way and you hear all these success stories of people who've overcome traumas and adversities, it's usually because nothing will motivate you in life like a bit of that trauma energy, we'll call it.
Mm,
But you got to be careful that even if you get some success on the other side of that, that you continue on in a healthy way. And honestly, it's been challenging, because really, if you see a lot of workaholics, say,
mm,
a lot of them will cite something where someone said at childhood they weren't going to make it or something like that.
mm,
But with that success can come a bit of a cost. So all I'm saying is, use what energy you've got. If
mm,
you've got, we'll call it trauma energy,
mm,
where you're out to prove that you can get your life back, or
mm,
prove that person
mm,
wrong, or someone who left you,
mm, mm, mm,
whatever.
mm,
Use that if you want to get up and running. But at some point, you can't run on that fuel forever.
mm,
You're going to have to rebalance with a positive, beautiful fuel. It's a bit like when you're going away from trauma, you're generally running away from a
mm,
bad
mm, mm, mm,
situation, the
mm,
carrot and the stick, versus a positive motivation, which is more, you're just beautifully working towards something, rather than the trauma motivation is, well, I'm going to prove him wrong, or I'm going to,
mm,
so just be careful for people that use what energy you've got to get you
mm.
out of a situation, but then, you know, a lot of self love, really, and a lot
Yeah,
of gratitude, and a lot of, more on the spiritual side of personal development, would say, to sort of love yourself on the journey, because a lot of trauma energy can really work, but it can
yeah,
backfire
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. Well, it's the light and dark of everything, like to your point,
Yeah.
because we were talking, I remember the pendulum analogy, but also the over revving your engine. And it's almost that speedometer that when we kind of put our foot too closely to the pedal to the metal kind of thing, it's not sustainable. I think that's the
No.
thing, isn't it? So we've got to be kind to ourselves in the darker moments, which is more
Yeah.
this trauma energy, but also kind to ourselves in the moments where we're overachieving or trying to overachieve, because we're over identifying with that new identity that we've created that's got us out of the hole.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
But actually, it's blending, it's alchemizing the light and
Yeah.
the dark, isn't it?
I completely agree. And you're right. You're not going to go through a very dark time and come out beautifully balanced
Yeah.
within a year. It's just not going to happen.
Mm,
You're probably going to have some angst in you with all them questions that went through, of like, why me, or why did
mm,
they leave me, or why did this
mm,
health happen to me, like, and you're probably going to use that to be a bit more successful, but then you want to be kind and loving to yourself. And it's you hear the same story with everything. It's like the Tiger Woods story, and
mm,
beating himself up, and his dad caught, and it works, but
mm,
you have to regroup, otherwise, you so point is, you want the trauma or the challenge to serve you initially, to get you off the starting blocks, but you don't want to cling on to some of the feelings and emotions
mm,
there.
mm,
You
mm,
want to learn to be at peace with it then, as you
mm,
go forward.
mm.
And
No, I love that.
that's a hard process that, honestly, I've only gone through fairly
Mm,
recently.
Yeah, it's the next, on to the next learning, isn't it?
Yeah.
On to the next one. So when something that I was going to bring up before, actually, and it fits here perfectly, how have you learned then to embrace, because you said before it's those, be that the embracing of those darker feelings when you were physically,
Mm.
healing, but what about embracing then the realization of, oh, I think I might be over revving my engine? I think, what for you personally, how have
Mm.
you felt the process of leaning in and embracing and being kind to yourself?
Well, well, first it starts. We've talked about this before, but first it starts off that the body will give you signs
Mm,
that something's not right with your strategy in life.
mm,
And so I was starting to get a few of these signs where, maybe I would be getting into a bit more of a rut, or maybe there'd be a few more like subtle tendencies to slightly self-sabotage,
mhm,
etc.
mhm, mhm,
And then you start questioning why. And of course, that's a beautiful moment to ask yourself and reassess stuff. And I think with me, I was working too much.
mhm,
I'd been so down and out for so many years that I think what got me out of hospital was the thought of, I'm going to prove to myself and others that I can get my life back on track.
of course.
And of course, that I just realized that there just comes a day when you think, I don't need to prove anything anymore. There's a shift that will come, and people will know it.
Mm,
It's just whether they pay attention to it.
mm,
And if you don't, well, you'll have to mask it with, say, drinking alcohol all the time or getting addicted to something,
mm,
because it will keep trying to tell you, I want to put you on a different path here.
mm,
But you just have to know that something's wrong and something's up. And then, as I did with you,
mm,
see a great coach to sort of help you introspect into what's worked for you in the past few years may
mm,
not be the right thing and the right system to get you going forward.
mm,
Um, yeah, because like I
mm.
say, a lot of trauma energy will work,
To a
but
point. Mm,
to a point. But ultimately, we want to be happy, and you have to let go of a bit of that. So I would, but it's a tricky thing to work out on your own. So I would,
mm,
go to someone like yourself or something, and
mm.
to always and as we said, it's always an ever changing game anyway.
Oh yeah, we never arrive.
We never
We think we're
arrive,
going to.
So
Yeah, yeah. But as you pointed out, and going back to the analogy of the the video game kind of thing, it's like you there's more skills, there's more tools, and something that you really clearly communicated there that I love is that I think the real practice here is about self-awareness. That
yeah,
actually, what is life trying to tell me? What is my body trying to tell me? And the
yeah.
very fact that you listened and you got curious and you tuned in, so you didn't fight against it, you got curious and you sought help.
I did for a little while,
Mm,
but there was some signs where I was agitated on a day off,
mm,
or I was anxious when I wasn't working,
mm,
or I felt low self-worth when my career wasn't doing well.
mm,
And it's starting to say, right, yes, I've got my life back on track now, Chris. I've
mm,
proven a point, but and a lot of people, as we know, will never want to listen to that voice because they're addicted
mm,
to
mm,
that identity or the work, or
mm,
and then I mean, there's loads of people we could name who are very famous
mm,
who are in this trap.
mm, mm,
But it's being able to always do the scary thing where even if you think you're this, I don't know, business person or this entrepreneur or this successful coach or whatever,
mm.
it's being able to constantly question everything, which is difficult to do,
Yeah.
and
It,
I
it,
think,
it's so hard, especially
yeah,
when you're identifying it. And
yeah,
something that and we've talked about a lot is that compassionate curiosity, that you're not being curious to judge yourself and go, oh, I'm doing this wrong, I'm not good enough. It's like, I'm feeling that something's off, and I'm going to really curiously lean in with a compassionate lens to understand, okay, how am I going to navigate through this?
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
particularly if you've gone through something big,
Mm,
like I say, like we've said, everything is going to go completely the direction. It's not going to fall into place beautifully because at the end of the day, if you've gone through a trauma,
mm,
it,
mm,
it just can't, like, well, it can, but
mm,
you're not going to feel like you've gone through health scare and then everything's going to work out beautifully when you get out of hospital. It's not going to be that. Like,
mm,
so
mm.
I think for people who, I think everyone should have a process of checking in with themselves. But I
Yes.
think even more than that, it should be even more crucial for people to do that if they've just been through a big change.
Yeah.
But whether it's every year, maybe you sit down and you journal, or you do a journaling course
Mm.
online. I've done a lot of them actually,
Yeah.
which are really beneficial. Or
Mm.
you check in on your values every year, or you know you have to do that even more so if you've gone through big changes before, because there'll be big changes after.
Yeah, no, I love that, and it's a really great point to remind people, on the bigger things to check in, but even day to day on your energy levels. Like yesterday, for example,
Yeah.
my body was clearly telling me to rest. My brain wasn't telling me that. My brain was like, but you have something to do. But it is that thing of, no, my body is literally asking me to rest. So are you going to give it that rest, or are you going to fight through it? And
Yeah.
for my default, it's coping mechanism, and so it's to push through. That's my default. So it
Right.
takes a lot of energy for me to practice. No, Christina, you need to rejuvenate, cultivate that energy back again, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So to summarize, and we've obviously covered a lot of ground, so thank you for just really sharing this journey that you've had through this change story. I'm sure that especially those that are listening that are challenging themselves with a health situation, or know somebody who have, that it must resonate a lot.
Mm.
When you're thinking about these learnings that you've had, what would you say is some of the top things that it's strengthened in you?
It's strengthening me. Well, there's those skills we talked about, like resilience and this, that, and the other. But I think the biggest strength now, in a way, I don't know if it's a strength, but it puts you on a, shall we call, like a seeker's path.
Mm.
Like this path now that I'm on, where say I would be like, going to a meditation retreat, going online to do an online journaling course, doing a life purpose course where I check in on my values. Like that stuff would never have happened before I got ill. So I think it's the strength is the person you become on that new path,
Mm.
because you have to become that person to get through.
Mm.
And I think that's what I'm grateful for, because even if it's tough sometimes, and it still is
Mm.
sometimes,
Mm.
as in life's just throws obstacles left, right, and center. You've got that perspective of, I've been through this, then I can, I get through that. But it's just the realization that, if that didn't happen to me, where would I be right now? Yeah,
Mm.
I'd maybe be more comfortable, but I'm glad that, something has to kick people sometimes on the spiritual path in life.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
And if you go to some meditation retreat or some breath work retreat or
Mm.
something like I like
Mm.
going on, there's no one there who everything's been going fine and
Mm.
dandy for. Like even Wim Hof, the breathing
Mm.
guy, I think he had a family tragedy and stuff like
Mm.
that. So, but it's in the end a great path to be on.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest strength is that it just puts you on that, we'll call it spiritual path in life that you
Mm.
probably wouldn't have been on
Yeah. Had
otherwise.
that not happened. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah,
so does that how's that influenced how you show up today? Obviously, it's put you on this new path of self-awareness. Sounds
yeah,
like, I think the spiritual path for a lot of people, maybe people who are listening to this going, oh, I don't like the sound of that, or maybe people do, right? But it's fundamentally what I'm hearing is that you now know yourself at such a deeper level than
yeah,
you ever have before.
yeah, exactly. And like I say, if people are saying, "Oh, I don't want to go through that spiritual path," well, if they're going through challenges, they are going through the spiritual path, because there's no way that you cannot understand how meaning works, or understand how your emotions work when you've got an ileostomy bag on your body.
Mm.
You
Mm.
have to master that. You have
Mm.
to be able to master your emotions. You have to be able to be honest with yourself. You have to be able to, you know, change the meaning you give to things, in order to make that work.
Mm.
So it's automatic, because as human beings we're always trying to survive,
Mm. Mm.
in
Mm.
whatever way. And
Mm.
so the learnings and the teachings will be automatic, really, as long as you're not going down that terrible rut where you are getting lost.
Mm.
And actually, just quickly, for someone who is, because people ask me this a lot, like,
Mm,
how did you get through that time, Chris? And what happens if I can't?
mm, mm,
You
mm,
know, what
mm.
happens if I just feel so? And what I say to people is, I like my analogies, but the other one is lifting weights. And for some people, if I had to lift a 10-pound bar right now, I could.
Mm,
But if you give me a 100-pound bar, I
yeah.
probably couldn't.
Mm,
And when people are weaker mentally because of the trauma,
mm,
the physical weights are mental weights, and the only way to lift more weights is to have more people with you lift them.
mm,
And so if someone's really struggling, they would have to reach out to as many people as they can in terms of health professionals, I think, to get through, to lift the weights
mm,
with you through the time. So I just wanted to mention that before we came to a close,
mm,
because I know that's
mm. Common
that's the thing,
question.
because sometimes the video game is very, very hard and you give up. And of course, at the end of my video, I talked about my friend who committed suicide
Mm,
because the video game was too hard.
mm,
And
mm.
sometimes you want to quit the game.
Yeah.
But the way through it is you have to not be going through it alone on
Yeah.
some form, way, shape, or level, whether it's a therapist, a psychotherapist, a
Mm,
coach, a counselor,
yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
Because if you're at a point where you just can't lift that weight, other
Mm.
people will help you lift it.
Yeah, yeah, because they're not alone. And if anyone is listening to this and feels really quite desperate, to Chris's point, that you're not alone. We're all in this together, and there's always someone out there to help. I think sometimes when you feel in such a dark place, you can tell
Mm,
yourself that there's not, but that simply isn't true. So
mm,
thank you for
mm.
sharing that and underlining it, because I think it's a really important point. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for sharing your amazing change story. Really enjoyed it. And I know people listening will have got some real wisdom and insight from that journey. And so for those people who maybe are going through something very similar and are looking to come and find you, talk to you, connect
Yeah.
with you, how can they do that?
So yeah, just type in the new identity, Christopher David Mitchell. I should come up on YouTube and stuff like that. I think that's where I'm generally, although I've taken a bit of a break recently, but that's where I'm generally the most active. And of course, I've got a website, so if anyone wants to there, they could, shoot me an email or get in the contact. I generally do hear a lot of people's stories, so I quite enjoy it, really. So and then check out the video if you want that some of this conversation was based on, which is my survival story living with an ileostomy bag. And just to say on a final thing, what you need, I think, for people going through is always a vision of the future still. And for me, that was, how can I turn this negative circumstance into a positive, or how can I use what I've been through to create change for the better?
Mm,
And for me, that was the YouTube video.
yeah.
But for someone else, it might be a book. For someone else, it might be a blog.
Mm,
For someone else, it might be part of a community
mm,
that have suffered with things like that, and you help out.
mm.
But I think that a way to truly do that final bit of healing is using what you've been through, all your experience and knowledge, to in some way inspire and impact others in whatever way works for you.
I love it. I love it. Thank you again
My
for
pleasure.
sharing. And I think that's a mic drop moment we will end on.
Awesome. Always a pleasure.
All right.